Hi, everyone. I am Nicholas Kemper, publisher of New York Review of Architecture. We are co-sponsoring this call for designs with the gallery Citygroup and the activist group, the Coalition for 100% Affordable 5WTC. We are really excited to see our prompt seems to have struck a chord. Since last Thursday, more than 100 teams have registered from Brazil, India, Melbourne, Santiago, Costa Rica, Denmark, Hong Kong, Stuttgart, and even Brooklyn. We are excited to be able to bring your expertise to the very specific and pressing discussion around the Fifth World Trade Center, and also for this to be a showcase for new ideas in affordable housing. Tonight, our partners, the Coalition for 100% Affordable 5WTC, are going to talk about the prompt, and then Michael and Violette of Citygroup are going to talk about the deliverables, and then we are going to take questions. The goal is to simply be helpful so that the proposals that come forth can be as substantial and well-grounded as possible. So with no further ado, here is Todd Fine of the Coalition for 100% Affordable 5WTC.
Thank you. And I would like to pass it off first to my colleague, Vittoria Fariello. Can she also be elevated?
Hi.
Okay.
You can hear me. So thank you. So first of all, thank you so much for having us and for hosting this and for putting out this call. As Nicholas said, we are the Coalition for 100% Affordable 5 World Trade Center. It was founded by 3 9/11 survivors, Mariama James, Jill Goodkind, and Taylor Banning, who is here with us today, in the spring of 2021, so in March. And it was right around the time that the LMDC, the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, put out their acceptance of the RFP for a building by Silverstein and Brookfield that would be 80 stories high with 25% affordability is what they said. And we in Lower Manhattan have lost over 5,000 affordable units in the last 12 years. And I realized I don't think I introduced myself. I'm Vittoria Fariello, or did I? But I'm a district leader down here. And so this is incredibly important to us as a community down here, but for the city as well, for everyone here. So the coalition came together to push and urge the city to make this 100% affordable. And of course, at first we were pretty much laughed at, but now people are starting to see the value and the possibility that this really presents. So we've grown incredibly. Our coalition has brought on a number of different other organizations, as well as a lot of political support, political clubs across Manhattan, and certainly we've gotten some elected officials on board, such as Representative Jerry Nadler, our State Senator Brian Kavanaugh, and Assemblymember Yuli New, as well as the county leader for the New York County, Keith Wright. So we're making lots of progress. We're getting very far, and we're so excited to see so many of you here. It's so amazing, and from all over the world. It's just really touching. So I don't want to go on too much more. So we are asking for 100% affordability. We are asking for a preference for 9/11 survivors, but we want to see deep affordability as well as a certain range at a certain amount. So I'd like to introduce who's here with us. As I said, Taylor Banning was a founding member, and she is also a 9/11 survivor and a community activist. And she will talk about growing up in Battery Park City as a survivor and the neighborhood and affordability there. We have Carol Lamberg, which we are so happy and proud to have on board with us. She is an affordable housing guru, and she was the executive director of the Settlement Housing Fund for 30 years. And she will talk about possible funds and the costs of the building at the site, which we know is a particular situation. And we have, of course, Todd Fine, our historian and the founder of Washington Street Historical Society, and also a very adamant and effective community activist. So thank you all so much for having us. And Taylor, you want to take it away?
No, I'm doing it.
I'm so sorry. Oh, sorry.
Okay. I'll do it. Thank you, Victoria. Okay, so I'm a historian who studies the 5 World Trade Center area, in light of its a longer term history, as actually a working class area. So it's not crazy to talk about affordable housing. You know, a lot of people think downtown Manhattan, they think of a business district, but actually the part of Lower Manhattan, which we call the Lower West Side, which is west of Broadway, east of the West Side Highway, definitely below Chambers Street. You can see a map here of what it used to look like. This is before the Battery Park City. You heard some people mention Battery Park City. That's all landfill from the World Trade Center. So this used to be the Little Syria neighborhood, and there's kind of a map of what it used to look like. And here's kind of the example on Washington Street of this working class area of immigrants who did work on the docks. From about 1880 to 1940, it was the center of Arab American life. And I think that's one of the people's interest in Arab America, which is something that's very little known, is one of the reasons that people have looked into this deeper, longer term question of this as a working class neighborhood. And there are still people who remember it, who feel frustrated that almost all government activity is to make this a high-rise area of just luxury apartments. And actually, the World Trade Center site, for people who know as well, also has a working class history. It used to be the electronics district called Radio Row. It's the center of electronics, and you could buy TVs and radios. And here's a protest of people when they were building the World Trade Center, angry that their businesses were going to be destroyed, which of course also included a lot of low-rise buildings that included some apartments as well. So there's a real historical grievance at stake that goes back a century, actually, in some ways, about how Lower Manhattan, this part of Lower Manhattan, is being converted to just total luxury. Now, specifically, the building that we are talking about here, 130 Liberty Street, and can people see the screen? Okay, I don't know if there's things over it. 130 Liberty Street is the Bankers Trust building. It was not part of the World Trade Center. It was not a World Trade Center building. There was actually a different 5 World Trade Center that was on the site. This building was just kind of a standard business building. You can see it in the lower left-hand corner here. It was heavily damaged in the September 11th attacks. And the Deutsche Bank, who owned it, had to do some negotiations with their insurers about an insurance payout, and they couldn't reach a deal. So what was called the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, which was a local city and state entity that was created to spend federal funds after 9/11, purchased it with hundreds of millions of dollars of US federal taxpayer money, and also used US taxpayer money to engage in its demolition, which was quite complicated because they had to do both a decontamination of the site and a demolition at the same time, which meant it ended up taking a long time. And it actually had some real mismanagement that led to, for instance, a fire in 2007. You can see the fire there. That's not from September 11th, that killed 2 firefighters. Another reason, this death that occurred during the demolition, another reason that there's feeling in the community that there needs to be some aspect of justice with what's done with this site for working class people, in addition to all the working class people who died in 9/11, which I don't need to say any more about. So after September 11th, there were these things called listening sessions where they asked the community what they would like to see as part of these billions of dollars that were being sent to Lower Manhattan. And invariably, at the top of these group meetings, these community engagement sessions, just like planning meetings, people always said, affordable housing, affordable housing. If we get federal money, it has to support a wide range of people. But the city and the state received $8 billion of special bonds called Liberty bonds that were tax exempt at the federal level, also the state and the local level. And after these listening sessions where people asked for affordable housing, none of that money went to dedicated affordable housing. There was about $2 billion of those funds that were dedicated to residential buildings in Lower Manhattan. And the only requirement was that 5% had to be given to people who were at or below 150% of the average of the area median income, which is like a very wealthy amount anyway. So there was pretty much very little funding, maybe about $40–50 million out of these maybe 10 to 20 billion dollars that went to affordable housing. So there's a huge grievance. And at the same time, over this period, there was conversion of office buildings to luxury market rate units that led to general gentrification in the area. And there was long-term affordable housing in Mitchell Lama. There's some more details you could look into, but there were certain dedicated affordable housing complexes that actually lost units since September 11th. So there's a real feeling of grievance in the community. And there were people in the community, like one of the husbands of one of our founders, of the founders of this coalition, who actually died of a 9/11 related cancer. By the way, this is another aspect of this that to think about, is that you have all these people in this area who breathe these toxic fumes, and many of them now have cancers, and many of them also, of course, need housing. So that's a context. And anyway, the husband of one of our members who died of a 9/11 cancer specifically advocated for about a decade now that 5 World Trade Center be a fully affordable unit. So this of complex. So there's a long history, even specifically for this site, 130 Liberty Street. Now, it became 5 World Trade Center because the federal government had bought it, and then this Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, as I mentioned, which managed the redevelopment. I'm sure as architects, you know about the famous competition, the Libeskind plan, the vaunted site plan for the World Trade Center. And you can see the Libeskind plan here, which has this sort of tower, which we now call the Freedom, George Pataki, the governor of New York, called the Freedom Tower. Of course, One World Trade Center looks nothing like this. But the key thing is not that tower, is that the site plan had this sort of idea that there would be these 5 towers, which they're still sticking to that idea. And you can see how they get progressively lower. There's not really, there was some ideas that they had to be, similar in look, but not really. Each architect or starchitect, as you guys know, kind of went in their own direction, and what is produced looks very different than what the Libeskind plan looks like. But there is still some idea that this is 5 World Trade Center, part of the Daniel Libeskind plan, which is important. And you would think that maybe that would have been considered more with the design of what they're proposing for this. But in all honesty, as someone who knows Lower Manhattan, that's kind of gone out the window a little bit. People have, it's been over 20 years now. People aren't really thinking about the Libeskind plan too much. So I think many people would be fine with any building at this site, but it is important to note that it is, responsive to this famous plan. Now, in that context, the site, which was owned by the LMDC, was informally given to the Port Authority, which is this big, vast transportation entity that actually owns the World Trade Center. And the premise was that this site, which was owned by LMDC, would be given to the Port Authority in exchange for a nonprofit being able to run the memorial and also to run this arts center at the site. Whether or not government entities really can be trading property, or what that means, or what revenue, this is a political question, but it's important to note that there's this other entity that does want to claim revenue from the site, which is the Port Authority. Now, the demolition of the building wasn't finished until 2011. Initially, there was actually a plan to build JP Morgan Chase's new headquarters at this site, and you can see actually an image that KPF, the same architect who's proposing this current market rate, this 5 World Trade Center design did. And this is, you can see their design. This is very early, but you can see how it does connect. That was, I believe, the design for the 5 World Trade Center, but there are for the JP Morgan building, but there are lots of different renderings. I don't know, maybe 5, 6 different renderings for this site over the years. In some ways, people have kind of thrown out vapor designs, as you can imagine, to keep things going. And here's some example of another KPF design. I'm not even sure where that came from, but that was thrown out a few years. Sometimes people just find these things in New York real estate press. They find some drawing and they just post it up there. And Port Authority themselves even wrote this, the future home of 5 World Trade Center, with this other design. No, but I'm not even sure where that came from. But the point is that people have been exercising a lot of different, throwing out different uses for this site over the years, although they all look quite similar, compared to what we see mostly in this part of Lower Manhattan. Now, after all these years, why are we still dealing with this 20 years later? Well, these two different government entities were fighting about what exactly should happen with the site. The Port Authority was content to wait for an office building someday. But as people know, 2 World Trade Center, they haven't even started yet. So there's this question, why would we start on 5 World Trade Center office building if we don't even have the demand for 2 World Trade Center? And there was also another long-standing desire among some of the Bloomberg world people, we think, or maybe from just the LMDC itself, which felt that a residential building could get a higher return, to make it residential. And so they actually did appraisals, and Governor Cuomo, former governor, struck a deal to do an RFP for a residential building that in 2019, and an RFP for either a residential building or an office building, and people could submit either. And this is what the site looked like for all these years. You know, for 10 years, you just had these Port Authority vehicles, police things. It's just a storage area, basically. And here's the selection criteria, as people can see, for this RFP that was concluded in 2019. And if the financial criteria, as you can see, is at the top. It's 50%. So that meant that pretty much people weren't going to submit bids for purely affordable buildings, because they were expected to raise revenue for the Port Authority or for the government. And so their community benefits and other aspects of the team were elements, but there were only 5 bids, we believe. They won't clarify exactly whether they were, how many were residential. We actually think that there were more office bids than residential. There's some rumors that maybe there was only just 1 residential bid, but surely there was not a lot of bids, and surely there was not really the same kind of architectural attention that was assumed with the original World Trade Center, Libeskind plan. There wasn't as much fanfare. The bids weren't given a lot of time. The bid that people have seen is this Silverstein Brookfield design. The RFP said that of this $1.3 million square feet, or excuse me, 1.345 square feet, about 1.2 could be residential, but we're not sure if that's based in law. It is clear that this building, we believe, went to the maximum square footage that one residential building could have. So that's something to maybe be aware of, is that there is state law that restricts the maximum amount of residential space in a building, and this seems to hit it or get close to it. They also changed the RFP to make it so that this would not be a sale of the property, it would be a lease. And that lease is being administered by another state agency, Empire State Development Corporation, which is the big state development arm. This isn't that important, but I just want to give the basic details. The numbers are 100, 1,020, 200 units. Other presentations will talk about, what you guys could think about in a counter, but the bottom line is that the community thinks that we can do better, especially given that there's now a strong political focus on equity, on the reaction to COVID, justice in having more housing in these wealthy, amenity-rich areas. We have tremendous local political support. We're told that it's impossible, but we think we can do better, especially given the history of this site and the justice involved. So the last thing I just wanted to say is that part of the reason I feel, not speaking for Citygroup or the New York Review of Architecture, but I kind of feel like this is an example for architecture to sort of redeem whatever happened with the World Trade Center planning in the first place. There was so much of a belief that architecture could inform that process and could produce something that maybe people were asking too much of architecture, but here we have a situation where we really want to encourage people to think about what could be done with the World Trade Center if they only could, if they could focus on something like justice, something like affordability, and spread that message. So I'll shift to Taylor Banning, who can talk more about what has happened in this community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Todd, and thank you, Vittoria, and thank you, Citygroup, and for having us, and for all of you for being here tonight. My name is Taylor Banning. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a lifelong resident of Lower Manhattan. I grew up in Battery Park City and was a child of 8 years old on 9/11 and was home that day. One of many, not many people realize, child survivors of 9/11, and have since grown up and watched leaders like those on this call, a part of our coalition, help rebuild our community. And sadly, in that time, as development has increased, access to affordable housing has decreased, and there hasn't been an intentional effort to provide more units for affordable housing. And our coalition, calling for 100% affordable housing at World Trade Center, are advocating for equity, inclusion, access, and genuinely affordable housing, and consistent with the representation of the diversity of the 9/11 community. Contrary to somewhat popular belief, not all or even the majority of 9/11 survivors are white or wealthy. And I have some data I can reference that another colleague of ours, Mariam and James, who has been really involved in 9/11 related research and health access in our community, was able to dig up and share in other spaces and with our coalition. So I can share some of it with you tonight. The African American, Hispanic, and or Indigenous 9/11 survivors are not receiving equal benefit or access to 9/11 related redevelopment, despite equal exposure to 9/11 related toxins and equal loss of health, property, and sometimes life. African Americans, Hispanics, and or the Indigenous are grossly underrepresented in Community Board 1, the geographic district where Site 5 of the World Trade Center falls, as compared to the rest of the city and the rest of the World Trade Center Health Program survivor program. And based on the US Census in 2019, the white population of New York City is up 10% from the New York City Department of Housing stats published in 2016 to 2018, while the population of other racial groups examined remains relatively the same. So this might suggest that the development that has been going on has provided an increased access for the white population, but not the same access for the non-white population. So even if unintentional, the combination of planning and zoning thus far has been favoring big real estate, and has in effect rendered Community Board 1 a segregated community. So our coalition does believe this cause is a racial justice issue and a social justice issue, and a chance to help desegregate this area. And so we're really excited to partner with you all, and we're really excited to see what designs you're able to come up with, because we really do believe this is an opportunity to do something that's never been done before in New York City. 100% affordable housing, building, tower. This is historic, and a chance to continue the work of the Civil Rights Act and try to implement integration in Lower Manhattan.
Thank you. I think we'll have Carol Lamberg, who's the former executive director of the Settlement Housing Fund, who is involved in many thousands of affordable creation, and she's also affordable units, and she's also a member of our coalition. Carol?
So Carol, There, I'm unmuted. Hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here and excited about your architectural participation. Yes, I've worked all my life in affordable housing. I was fortunate enough to have work that I really loved. And sometimes I get so crazy about a site that, you know, I just want to be on the team and get something done. And when Todd approached me and I met the other members of the coalition, my goodness, the idea of building an affordable housing building on Site 5 of the World Trade Center, to say we're finalizing the redevelopment of World Trade Center by building diverse affordable housing with special reach out to 9/11 survivors, and I think first responders as well. What a statement that is to the world. And its inclusion in a high income area. It's yes in my backyard. And I was just excited to participate. My friends who in government who worked very hard, I think fought with each other and was able to get it a 25% affordable, but 100% I said would be 4 times better. So what do? What they told me was that the tower is going to cost $1 million a unit. It's $1,000 a square foot. Affordable housing right now, it's everything is sticker shock and expensive in New York, 450,000 square foot. If we took 1,200 units, it would mean all the buildings that were going up in other neighborhoods just would eat up, couldn't have any of the funding. We'd eat up the entire budget. So that was a challenge. So I thought of different ways to finance the project that wouldn't use any of the existing city programs. One way that I've been trying to get done for a long time is to use something called a 501c3 bond. Excuse me if I sound too geeky, I'll try not to. But you'd have to have a nonprofit owner. And because of some regulation that limits the funding, I suggested we put a hospital on the ground floor because that would eliminate the cost limit if you read the fine print of the regulations. That's one possibility. And then I got excited about that. And then I started talking to architect friend of mine who has done most of the work that I did. And he said, oh, $1 million a square foot, that can't be, that's ridiculous. We have to be able to do something better. He looked at it. He didn't think you could do an 80-story building. He thought maybe a 60-story building. A high-rise super structure of a tower is going to be expensive. And the design guidelines they had, we don't like them, but they added significantly to the cost. So I also talked to a really, it sounds like an oxymoron, but a very honest contractor that I've worked with who really looked around and he thought we could get it down to $600 a square foot. And I went through some numbers and did a little back of the envelope financial projections. And I thought we really should go to Congress and get them to give an appropriation for the whole thing. It would really make Jerry Nadler's career, could be his swan song. He's not as old as I am, but close. And what a great thing to do, what a great message to send. And with all of us working hard, we'll just have to be able to get this done. So again, a beautiful building to complete the World Trade Center site. We need all your brains to think of architectural miracles to bring down the cost as much as possible with still a beautiful design. And so we want 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. I think we need a mix of income groups with maybe 30 or 40% very deep affordable, and maybe the top would be to a high enough income to include some of the first responders, and to really have a community that we could all be proud of. So that's what's been occupying a lot of my head over the last, since Todd and Vittoria and everybody were nice enough to involve me in this endeavor. And when I learned about affordable housing from a really brilliant, eccentric, wonderful guy, he was a conscientious objector in World War II, but went there to be a mental health nurse, but he knew every aspect of affordable housing. He said, the most difficult thing is the political. The second most difficult is the economics, just getting the subsidy mixed together to make it work. Building the building. Once you get all that done, building the building, if you have good professionals, you can do it. So I think the team is very good on the politics. I used to be very good at the financing, and we've got to find a way to get this done. So appreciate that all the people who are involved and who are on this call. It's very gratifying to have you there. So back to you, Todd.
I think we'll let the Citygroup and the New York Review take it over. Thank you, guys.
Great, thanks
Thank you
much.
so much.
So I'm Michael, and
I'm Violet.
we're members of Citygroup. And we just wanted to start out by thanking everybody from the coalition who's here, Todd and Taylor and Carol and Vittoria. This effort is really inspired by all of what you're doing, and we hope we can be a small part of supporting that effort and of trying to make this building 100% affordable. And we're excited to bring architects into this effort and get architects thinking about what it means to build a tower in downtown Manhattan and also in affordable housing. And just to start off, Citygroup is a space on the Lower East Side, and we gather in this space to organize debates, exhibitions, installations, and just to meet and think about architecture and the future of the city. It becomes a gallery when there's an exhibition, but it's not, we really don't think of it as a gallery. It's just a place to gather in the Lower East Side. And we're also part of the Chinatown, Citygroup is part of the Chinatown Working Group, which is a coalition of organizations on the Lower East Side and in Chinatown that's working to pass a community-led zoning plan that really focuses on fighting gentrification and displacement and building affordable housing in downtown New York. And through that effort, we met Todd and also became familiar with this effort to make 5 World Trade Center 100% affordable. So we see this as an extension of our work in our neighborhood and the neighborhood that we live in and work in. And so we're excited to continue this effort. So now we're going to just take you quickly through the briefing document and go through the deliverables and the schedules. And we're going to do this very quickly so we can allow for time for questions and for comments and feedback.
Yeah, I think maybe the most important thing to say as we delve into the briefing document is that the purpose of this call is really to collect as many ideas. I think that Carol said it very beautifully. We need all your brains. So we're hoping that you will create your proposals and illustrate them in the one perspective, and also provide a 350 word description that will really make the argument that completes what the your visualization is telling us. So this is very much about the argument behind the proposal as much as it is the image that you produce.
So what you're seeing on your screen that we're sharing is the briefing document that all of you should have received ahead of this meeting. And if you haven't received this, or if you have any questions or you want to follow up about anything, don't hesitate to reach out to us. So just to start off, we'll quickly go through the schedule. Today we're having the information session. And then we had this information on January 10th because on January 12th, there's a public hearing where it will be the opening period of it will be a presentation of the current proposal and a period of comment for commenting on the proposal will open up at that time. So within this briefing document, we provided a link to that hearing, which is on January 12th in 2 days at 5 p.m. And we encourage all of you to join that meeting just to find out more information about the project, the history of the project, and the current proposal. So as you know, the submission date is February 12th, and we realize that this is a very fast time period, but we're doing this so we can, as you can see, on February 15th, the comment period of the public hearing closes, and what we'd like to do is collect all of your submissions and post them as a comment within this public hearing. So the idea is to just reiterate the deadline, the submission deadline is on February 12th.
And just to be clear, it's the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation who will be receiving these comments. So at the end of, well, mid-February, they will receive our submission collectively, which would be a number of completely new to them proposals for 100% affordable 505 center.
And as we mentioned in the email that all of you received and in the announcement for this exhibition, this call for designs, all of your the submissions will be featured and highlighted within a edition of the New York Review for Architecture, and then we will also be organizing an exhibition within our space of all of the visualizations.
So it is a requirement for all proposals to be 100% affordable housing for reasons that I hope are pretty clear. And then the current proposal has 300 units of affordable housing. So we're asking the assembled group not to propose any less than 300 units. Okay, so then the deliverables are a perspective image of the tower proposal using the provided background. That was included in the zipped folder that went out this morning, or that some of you may have received this afternoon. And then we're asking you to submit your image as either Photoshop or a JPEG file, and you can read the pixel size and resolution that we're requesting.
And we just wanted to mention that we sent you a Photoshop file and also a JPEG file. Within that Photoshop file, there are different layers, and you can turn off the existing tower on or off just as a reference. But we wanted to say there's no requirement. Yeah, the final submission that will use this background just because we want to be able to look at all of the submissions from the same perspective and compare them. But there's no requirement of using Photoshop, using a CAD software. We are really open to experimentation with how you create your proposal. So it can just be print out the JPEG photo, draw on top of it, collage, existing imagery. We really want people to experiment and also work on this project in any way that feels right to them or comfortable with you. And we don't want to prohibit people who don't have certain skills in software to participate in this. So we're very open to proposals from architects and from anybody who really wants to get involved. And as we said, the one requirement is that the proposals are 100% affordable, and there's a minimum of 300 units.
Just to say it out loud, you don't have to be an architect to submit. So anyone who's interested in this call for ideas can submit a drawing or an image with the background. Another deliverable is the text. So the 250 word max statement that we mentioned earlier, which would articulate the argument that accompanies your proposal.
And just quickly, in the zipped folder that we sent to all of you, we included a Photoshop file. There's also a JPEG file, and then we also provided a Rhino file, a file that has the 3D information for the site and its surrounding context. And we provided this file just as for those of you who want to work in 3D, you're welcome to use this. And but it's absolutely not a requirement. We also found that we worked on trying to match up one of the views in this 3D file to the perspective image that shows the KPF rendering, the existing proposal perspective. And we weren't able to exactly match it up or perfectly match up the 3D file to the image. If someone's able to do that, we would love to hear from you and be extremely helpful. But so you won't be able to directly export a view from that file into the Photoshop file, but we hope that having this 3D file will help you in developing your design.
So we've included these references as links in the brief. This is the video of the latest.
Yes, so these are just additional links that will provide you additional information on the coalition for 100% affordable 5 World Trade Center, and then a lot of background information on the current proposal and the effort to make this affordable housing, make this tower affordable housing. Also, in this briefing document, we answered some of the questions that people submitted in the sign-up form. But just because we want to wrap up at 8 p.m. and keep this to an hour, we'll let all of you read through those questions or the answers to those questions. And we just wanted to open it up now for people to ask questions. You can submit questions within the chat or raise your hand and we can call on you. But we just want to give some time for you to ask questions to us or to anybody in the coalition or to but we really are excited about all of the interest in this and can't wait to see when everybody submits.
Is there a way to have more than 300 units? Because that's what we would get now.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. That's just the bare minimum for proposals.
Even so, if you could make the minimum, if it was 600, that would be more significant because they're giving us 300 all, and we want to have something better, if possible.
We could make it 1,200.
That was 1,200 is what I was thinking.
Yeah, that is our hope. Our hope is that we can build something. We have, and I don't want to speak for everyone on the coalition, but it's not the height of the building that bothers us in the slightest. It's that we need affordability. We need this building. We need a lot of affordable housing. And so we're looking for as much as we can.
I'm down for 1,200.
It's not the site. It limits you to a tower, which isn't going to be cheap, but still, you all probably have very good ideas what to do about that. 1,200 would be ideal. I would think 600 would be the minimum. And I like your assistant there on your lap.
Very helpful.
I think we can increase the minimum.
We can also make a note that the hope is to produce as many affordable units as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a question about whether if there was more affordable hypothetical funding. Yes, and I think that's important to note. This is not a call to necessarily make cheap housing. There is an assumption here that there will be additional federal funding or that we're trying to seek it. So if you have a proposal that requires a lot of additional funding, that shouldn't deter you. It's up to you to make that balance.
Yeah.
Right. So I think what, we as a coalition come up against all the time is this is too expensive. And of course, to us, it's it's housing. It doesn't matter how expensive it is, we need it.
Well,
But
when we're, using other buildings that are, 12 stories are so much more affordable. And there's always a tension between something great and serving as many people who are in such dire need of housing. So
for sure.
Yeah.
So, but we're also very hopeful. Well,
Yeah.
I'm very hopeful that we're going to get the funds we need.
We'll go for it.
That's right.
Yeah. But the point is, people should also privilege their architectural expression as well as it's just a desire to crunch to reduce the cost. And you see there's a second question about mixed community support, mixed use part of the building. Yeah, so the current design does have some retail and some community facility space, and so that I think could also be part of the design as well.
Also, in terms of the cost of the construction of the building, I think there's a strong argument to be said that so much public funding has already gone into the World Trade Center site that building a extremely expensive tower that's all affordable housing is not out of the question.
Yeah, we should add that the current proposal has no government subsidy at all besides giving the site, which is a real anomaly for the World Trade Center. I mean, the World Trade Center has received tens of billions of dollars in subsidies. It's even hard to even put a number on it. So it's strange in some ways that the only site that would have affordable housing currently does not have a defined subsidy, and that we're hoping that will change definitely.
Well, they're very proud of that. It's not, we don't want to deplete the affordable housing funds for the city, but we think we have a great case for additional federal funding.
There's a question about zoning and the setbacks. Yeah, I don't think, so this actually, people should be aware, this site is actually interesting because it's under state rules, not city rules actually, because it's part of the World Trade Center, which is administered by the state. So typical New York rules about setbacks and the podium actually don't apply here. So, and we're not really sticklers for that anyway. I don't think Citygroup could say it, but I feel like people should not feel constrained by New York City city laws about setbacks and the podium and those type of things. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Citygroup?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do have a question. Thank you for the presentations. It's great to see everybody. I really appreciated what was said earlier about potentially having the hospital on the ground floor as the source of kind of removing the ceiling of certain funding mechanisms. It seemed that the finances are a really important part to the city and to the decision makers in this proposal to kind of take it seriously. And so, as it's certainly not my area of expertise, I was wondering if we can put together some sort of document or so with these loopholes that have been found, or the various things that the architecture should be responding to that will make it a more like realistic and feasible strategy.
Wow. There are 501c3 bonds, and there are some regulations that are printed. I could forward them. It's a lot of, it really doesn't have much to do with design, but I attended a bond buyer program, coincidentally, talking about 501c3 bonding, and asked whether a hospital would allow us to get out of that conundrum, and they all said yes. And there are other ways to do it too, with different quadrants of the fund. I mean, we go through contortions to be able to fund things and make an exception to, in order to get anything done at all. But I think, what we're looking for is some terrific design ideas that would And just your participation is great. If you really want to see the 501c3 bond regulations, I'm happy to get them.
Yeah, and we've done actually in the past a short write-up about possibilities. We haven't made it public yet, but we might be able, if there are teams that are interested in the policy part of it as part of their proposal, we could probably give some of that information.
Yeah.
And we'll create a document where we can upload information about the policy. And there's also a lot of interest in the construction costs. So we can create a working document where people can ask questions and we can provide answers and just follow up on things. But there does seem to be a lot of interest beyond just the design and aesthetic of the building. So I think we're excited to engage in that conversation.
So I see a question of somebody asking whether 1 month is too little for such a complicated process. And we actually had something we wanted to say about that. I think our thinking is that because the deliverable, Citygroup can speak, is basic, is just, you know, one image, that's a reasonable starting point for 1 month. But we are prepared. We're not promising anything, but we are willing to, you know, to maybe, if there are teams that feel they want to do something much more elaborative, we're willing to explore that maybe with some follow-up events and activities. But right now we're just sticking to the one deliverable. But Citygroup can say more.
Well, I would also add that because we're up against the February 15th end of the commenting period, that's really what we are trying to insert ourselves into. And I see that as sort of putting our foot in the door before it shuts, so that all of a sudden the conversation becomes about, it's no longer, we have a proposal, we'll move forward now. It's like, actually, there's an abundance of proposals. There's so many more ideas than this relatively conventional one.
Yeah, we've also found that so often in community efforts related to zoning or for affordable housing or preservation, the activists and community gets labeled as NIMBYist, and people who are in power say or feel that the activists are just against everything. And we feel that this is an important opportunity to show that there are other options and that we are really for something. We're standing behind these images.
Yeah, now there's another question about whether the project is constrained by the boundaries of the site. Could they use cantilevers and footbridges? I think so, as long as it can fit on the graphic. Am I wrong? I don't know. Citigroup could say.
Yeah, we want to see people's visions, and we want people to experiment and be provocative and push people's understanding of what might be acceptable in this site. And we realize that everybody will have a different approach to this, and we welcome all of that. And I see that Taisha has a question about the construction costs.
Yeah, just while we were talking about this resource document, I'm also not, I remember reading in the brief that the height of the tower is the reason for the very exorbitant construction costs, the higher it gets. So could we get some sort of a resource document that tells us how high and what the cost of specific heights could be? For example, 50 stories, 60 stories, 40 stories, just a ballpark, if that's possible.
That's tricky because different construction materials, techniques, geographies would carry different costs. And I think as much as that's really important to the argument that the coalition wants to make, that we can make this project viable, I think in the first 4 weeks, the proposals should take a lot into account. They don't, depending on how you want to structure your argument, that doesn't have to be fully fleshed out.
But yeah, we can try to find some general, we don't have that information right now, but we can try to find some general background information on heights of tower and costs, but we'll see if we can find that. And if anybody finds that or has information on that, we'd love for you to share that.
Well,
There's a question, can we submit more than one scheme per group?
Sure, why not? We're happy to receive as many images as possible.
Careful what you wish for.
We want 100 proposals for 100% affordable fiber.
And I'd like to just say, rest assured that we will continue fighting for this. So whatever building you come up with, we will find the money, we'll find the resources, we'll find the political will. So, you know, I think,
Yeah.
you know, of course, it'll be easier for us if it's something that is, you know, not as expensive and we don't have to ask for another 20 billion from the government. But that's, but we're, you know, we're going to push for that. So we're really excited. This is so great to see so many people have such an interest in this.
really is.
I would also quickly add that I think that the proposals are going to act on two different levels, and one of which is to provide doorways to routes forward to this very specific conversation that the coalition has been so deep in the trenches and for so long. But the other level would be as kind of commentary on how to do high-rise affordable housing anywhere and what affordable housing can look like. And I think even though proposals in that latter category may not necessarily be the thing that we'll be able to use in a specific site, insofar as it brings kind of a wider attention to the issue, that the two will kind of talk to each other in a way that's really productive. And so I think you can go down either of those paths and play a very productive role here. I also want to add something to the like having affordable housing be cheap. There's a very kind of troubled history in the United States of the first time they passed public housing bills. The contractor lobby very specifically made them peg it to a certain price per square foot so as to guarantee that the public housing was going to be bad, like poor quality, because they didn't want to have competition for market rate housing. And they knew if you couldn't spend more than a certain amount per square foot, then it would be very hard to be viable competition. And ever since, there's been this fixation in the United States on making affordable housing cheap when it really should be on making it good. And so I'm glad that the coalition is open to those ideas as well. Should we wrap up? Do we have anything else? Artemis put in a question here just to say that its month is a very short time, and yes, it is. I would just point out that it's a much, this is a long discussion that's been going on clearly for a long time before us and will continue going on after. And so we're but one kind of engagement in a longer campaign, and that we're kind of, and because it's such a large question, that's why we've kept the deliverable so focused. Does anybody else want to say anything, or should we go ahead and call that a game? Okay.
Thanks so much for having us.
Indeed.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining this evening and showing such an interest.
Absolutely. We'll look forward, and feel free to send more questions.